The sound cut through the Manhattan boardroom like a whip crack, cruel laughter that made your skin crawl. Richard Sterling, worth $2.3 billion, was having the time of his life humiliating a 64-year-old cleaning lady who dared claim she spoke 9 languages. What this billionaire didn't know was that in exactly 6 minutes and 37 seconds, this invisible woman would speak words that would shatter his entire world and save him from the biggest mistake of his billion-dollar career. The 47th floor of Sterling Technologies gleamed like a monument to excess. Every surface screamed money, from the Italian marble floors to the floor-to-ceiling windows that made Manhattan look like a personal kingdom. But in the corner of the executive conference room, Martha Rodriguez moved like a ghost. 64 years old, wearing a faded blue uniform that had seen too many wash cycles, she emptied waste baskets with the practiced efficiency of someone who had perfected the art of being invisible. Her weathered hands, marked by decades of honest work, moved silently from trash can to trash can. She had learned long ago that the wealthy preferred their service workers to be seen but never heard, present but never acknowledged. For 11 years, she had cleaned these offices, dusted these desks, and polished these windows while remaining as invisible as the air they breathed. But today was different. Today, Richard Sterling sat at his massive mahogany desk, a piece of furniture that cost more than most people's cars, hosting what he called the most important video call of the quarter. The 65-inch screen dominated the far wall, displaying 3 Japanese businessmen in perfectly pressed suits, their faces composed with the careful politeness that marked serious negotiations. Sterling himself was a walking advertisement for privilege. His $8,000 suit fit like it was sewn directly onto his body. His Harvard MBA diploma hung prominently behind his chair, and his movements carried the casual confidence of a man who had never been told no in any language. He leaned back in his leather chair, worth more than Martha earned in 3 months, with the satisfied smile of someone who controlled everything in his line of sight. The Japanese investors were discussing an $80 million manufacturing partnership, their voices carrying the weight of international commerce through the conference room speakers. Sterling nodded along, occasionally interjecting with the kind of generic business speak that sounded impressive but said nothing at all. That's when Yamamoto-san, the lead investor, asked the question that would change everything. Sterling-san, for this partnership to succeed, we need someone on your team who understands Japanese business culture. Do any of your executives speak our language? Sterling's pause lasted exactly 3 seconds too long. His smile faltered for just a moment before he recovered with a laugh that didn't quite reach his eyes. Well, we have translation services, of course. But fluent Japanese speakers on staff? That's a bit specialized for our operation. Martha's hands stopped moving. She had been reaching for the waste basket beside Sterling's desk when the words hit her like a physical blow. Not the question itself, but the dismissive tone, the casual assumption that no one in his American company could possibly possess such skills. After 11 years of listening to his conversations, watching his business deals crumble because of cultural misunderstandings he was too proud to acknowledge, something inside her finally snapped. "I speak Japanese," she said softly. The words fell into the silence like stones into still water. Sterling's head turned toward her so fast she thought she heard his neck crack. His eyes, which had never really focused on her in 11 years of shared space, suddenly locked onto her face with the intensity of a man who wasn't sure he had heard correctly. "Excuse me." His voice carried the dangerous quiet of someone whose world had just tilted off its axis. Martha straightened her spine, feeling decades of invisible service crystallizing into this one moment of truth. "I said I speak Japanese, along with 8 other languages." The laughter that erupted from Sterling's throat was worse than any scream. It started low, like a rumble of distant thunder, then built into something savage and delighted. He slapped his hand on the mahogany desk, the sound sharp as a gunshot in the conference room. 9 languages! He gasped between waves of laughter, making sure his voice was loud enough for the Japanese investors to hear every word. Did you hear that, Yamamoto-san? My cleaning lady thinks she's a United Nations interpreter. She probably learned hello and bathroom from Google Translate and thinks she's multilingual. The Japanese businessmen on the screen shifted uncomfortably, their carefully composed faces showing the first cracks of confusion and distaste. This wasn't how serious business was conducted in their culture, but Sterling was too drunk on his own cruelty to notice. He stood up from his chair, all 6 feet of him towering over Martha's smaller frame, his voice dripping with condescension. Let me guess, you watched some foreign movies with subtitles and now you think you're an interpreter? Or maybe you picked up a few phrases from other cleaning staff. This is rich. Martha felt every eye in that room, both physical and digital, focused on her. The weight of Sterling's mockery pressed down like a physical force, but underneath the humiliation, something else was building. Something that had been compressed and contained for 11 long years of being treated like furniture, like a fixture that cleaned and polished but never thought, never felt, never had anything valuable to contribute. Her voice, when she spoke again, carried a quiet dignity that cut through Sterling's laughter like a blade through silk. Mr. Sterling, I understand you find this amusing. Which language would you prefer I demonstrate first? The laughter died in his throat. For the first time in their 11-year acquaintance, Richard Sterling was looking at Martha Rodriguez, really looking at her. And what he saw in her eyes was something that made his stomach clench with an emotion he couldn't quite name. Not fear, exactly, but something close to it. Something that whispered maybe, just maybe, he had made a terrible mistake. The conference room fell silent except for the hum of expensive electronics and the distant sounds of Manhattan traffic 47 floors below. On the screen, the Japanese investors waited with the patience of people who had suddenly realized they were about to witness something extraordinary. Why her? Why now? And what secret had she been keeping for 11 long years while polishing the floors and emptying the trash cans of the man who had just publicly humiliated her in front of international business partners? If you've ever watched someone get humiliated for being different and felt that burn in your chest, you know exactly what Martha feels right now. Hit that subscribe button if you believe everyone deserves respect, regardless of their uniform. Because what happens next will restore your faith in justice. Martha's hands, those weathered hands that Sterling had never really noticed, slowly reached into her cleaning cart. But instead of pulling out supplies or equipment, she retrieved a small personal bag, worn leather, carefully maintained, the kind that holds things too precious to leave behind. Her movements were deliberate, unhurried, like someone who had been preparing for this moment for longer than anyone could imagine. Sterling watched her with growing unease. This wasn't how these situations were supposed to go. The cleaning lady was supposed to mumble an apology, maybe blush with embarrassment, then return to her work with her head down and her dignity properly crushed. She wasn't supposed to move with this quiet confidence, this unsettling sense of purpose. "What are you doing?" he demanded, but his voice lacked its earlier conviction. Something in Martha's demeanor was making him doubt himself, and Richard Sterling wasn't a man comfortable with doubt. Martha's eyes met his one more time, and in them, he saw 11 years of careful observation, patient planning, and the kind of intelligence that doesn't need expensive degrees or corner offices to prove its worth. "I'm about to show you," she said simply, "what happens when you spend 11 years underestimating the wrong person." If stories about hidden strength and unexpected justice make your heart race, I've got an entire collection of SoulThread stories that will keep you glued to your screen. Let me know in the comments if you want access to all of them. What Martha said next would prove she hadn't just learned languages, she had mastered the art of international business. She turned toward the massive screen where the 3 Japanese investors waited, their polished faces reflecting a mixture of curiosity and professional courtesy. Sterling's laughter still echoed in the room like the dying sound of something that should never have been born. But Martha's attention was no longer on him. She had work to do. When she spoke, the words that flowed from her lips carried the musical precision of someone who hadn't just studied Japanese, but lived within its cultural heartbeat. Yamamoto-san, Rodriguez to Mashimasu. Sterling-san no kaisha no kakusai biyu de hatarite orimesu. Kongo no patanashipu enai tsut. Ni dai shihanki no yasoku dita o gosetsumaishitai to omomasu. The transformation in the room was immediate and electric. Sterling's coffee cup, which had been halfway to his lips in preparation for another round of mockery, froze in midair. His mouth fell open slightly, creating an expression that would have been comical if the moment weren't so charged with tension. But the real magic happened on the screen. Yamamoto-san's carefully controlled professional mask cracked into something approaching delight. He leaned forward, his colleagues flanking him with expressions of genuine surprise and growing respect. Rodriguez-san, Yamamoto-san replied in rapid Japanese, his voice warming with the kind of enthusiasm reserved for unexpected gifts. Your pronunciation is exceptional. More than that, you understand the proper business honorifics. Please, tell us about these quarterly projections. Martha's response flowed like water finding its natural course. She discussed market analysis with the fluidity of someone who had spent years studying not just the language, but the intricate dance of Japanese business culture. She referenced seasonal marketing strategies, spoke about long-term relationship building versus short-term profit maximization, and demonstrated an understanding of concepts that Sterling barely grasped in English, let alone in their cultural context. Sterling watched this exchange with the growing horror of a man who had just realized he was witnessing something impossible. This was Martha Rodriguez, the woman who emptied his trash cans, who he passed in hallways without acknowledgement, who had been as invisible to him as wallpaper for over a decade. And she was conducting business negotiations in Japanese with a sophistication that made his own contributions to the call sound like amateur hour. The Japanese investors were not just impressed, they were delighted. Their responses came faster now, more animated, as Martha navigated complex discussions about manufacturing timelines and quality control standards with the ease of someone who had been born to this work. Sterling-san, Yamamoto-san said, switching back to English with obvious effort, as if Japanese had become his preferred language for this conversation. Your colleague speaks better business Japanese than most of our Tokyo executives. Where did you find such talent? The question hung in the air like smoke from a house fire. Sterling's face cycled through a rainbow of confusion, embarrassment, and growing panic. His mouth opened and closed twice before any words emerged. Colleague. The word came out strangled, disbelieving. She cleans the offices. The silence that followed was deafening. Even through the digital connection, the Japanese investors' discomfort was visible. They exchanged glances that spoke volumes about cultural sensitivity and proper respect for human dignity, concepts that Sterling had apparently never encountered despite his expensive education. Martha maintained her professional composure, but those who knew how to look could see the slight upturn at the corner of her mouth. For 11 years, she had watched this man fumble international relationships through ignorance and arrogance. Today, she was showing him what competence actually looked like. Sterling-san, one of the other investors said carefully, perhaps we have misunderstood your organizational structure. Rodriguez-san demonstrates expertise that suggests significant experience in international commerce. Sterling felt the ground shifting beneath his designer shoes. The carefully constructed world where he was the smartest person in every room was crumbling with each perfectly pronounced syllable that came from Martha's lips. This woman he had dismissed as barely worthy of his attention, was conducting business at a level that made his own skills look pedestrian. How many brilliant people do you walk past every day without seeing them? Type invisible if you've ever felt overlooked because of your job or background. Martha's about to prove that intelligence doesn't wear designer suits. The Japanese investors continued their conversation with Martha, completely bypassing Sterling as if he had become the invisible one in his own conference room. They discussed cultural considerations for the American market, asked her opinions on timing and presentation strategies, and treated her insights with the respect typically reserved for senior executives. Sterling watched his control of the situation evaporate like morning mist. The power dynamic in his own office was shifting so dramatically that he felt dizzy. Martha, who moments before had been the target of his cruel amusement, was now commanding the respect of clients he had been courting for months. But this was just the beginning. As Martha continued to demonstrate her fluency, Sterling began to realize that her knowledge went far deeper than language skills. She understood markets, cultural nuances, business strategies, and most terrifyingly of all, she had been watching him make mistake after mistake for years without saying a word. The woman he had underestimated, dismissed, and humiliated was about to teach him a lesson that would cost far more than his pride. She was about to show him exactly what 11 years of careful observation and hidden preparation could accomplish when combined with the kind of intelligence that money can't buy and arrogance can't recognize. Martha's slight smile deepened as she watched confusion replace condescension in Sterling's eyes. The real demonstration was just getting started. What Martha pulled from her bag would prove she hadn't just been cleaning offices, she had been gathering intelligence. The worn leather portfolio she withdrew from her personal bag looked like it belonged in a professor's study, not in the hands of someone Sterling had dismissed as hired help. The leather was soft with age and careful maintenance, the kind of patina that comes from years of being opened and closed with reverence. As Martha's steady fingers worked the brass clasp, Sterling felt something cold settle in his stomach. "David," Sterling called to his assistant, his voice carrying a note of desperation he didn't recognize in himself. "Come here." David Chen, a 26-year-old Harvard MBA who had been quietly working at his laptop near the conference room door, looked up with curiosity. He had watched the entire exchange with growing fascination, his own assumptions about Martha crumbling along with his boss's confidence. Martha opened the portfolio with the care of someone revealing precious treasures. Inside, arranged with meticulous organization, were documents that made Sterling's throat tighten. Official papers, certificates, transcripts, all bearing seals, stamps, and signatures that even from a distance looked authentically, impossibly legitimate. "Here," Martha said quietly, selecting the first document and placing it on Sterling's mahogany desk like she was presenting evidence in a courtroom, "is my master's degree in applied linguistics from Universidad Nacional in Bogotá. Graduated summa cum laude in 1989. Sterling snatched the document with hands that weren't quite steady. The paper felt real, substantial. The university seal was embossed, raised slightly from the surface in a way that was nearly impossible to fake. The Spanish text was formal and official, describing academic achievements that made his own business degree look elementary. This could be forged," he stammered, but his voice lacked conviction. The document looked and felt authentic in ways that made his denial sound hollow even to himself. "David," Martha said, turning to the assistant with a gentle smile, "would you mind verifying the authenticity? The university has an online verification system. The certificate number is there at the bottom." David moved closer, his laptop in hand, fingers already flying across the keyboard. Sterling watched his assistant's face as he navigated to the university's website, entered the certificate number, and waited for the results. The silence stretched like a taut wire. It's legitimate, sir," David said, his voice barely above a whisper. The database confirms everything. Graduation date, honors, even her thesis topic, cultural bridge building through multilingual business communication. Sterling's world tilted sideways. Martha had already placed a second document on his desk. "This is my teaching certificate in international business communication from the Instituto de Idiomas Internacional," she continued with the calm patience of someone who had waited 11 years to have this conversation. "I specialized in cross-cultural negotiation strategies." Sterling grabbed this certificate too, studying every detail like a man searching for a lifeline. The seals were different, the paper quality distinct, the formatting unique to its institution. Everything about it screamed authenticity. Martha wasn't finished. Document after document emerged from her portfolio like evidence in a trial where Sterling was both judge and defendant. A translation certification from United Nations approved programs. Advanced courses from the New York Public Library System, each certificate signed and dated. Online university certifications from prestigious institutions worldwide. Cultural training certificates in international protocol and etiquette. With each revelation, Sterling's face grew paler. These weren't random pieces of paper thrown together to support a desperate lie. They represented decades of continuous learning, professional development, and intellectual growth. They told the story of a woman who had never stopped educating herself, never stopped pushing the boundaries of her knowledge, never stopped growing. "David, check them all," Sterling commanded, desperation creeping into his voice. "Every single one." His assistant's fingers flew across the keyboard, verifying certificate after certificate. Each search returned the same result: authentic, legitimate, real. The woman Sterling had dismissed as barely capable of understanding English had been studying languages, culture, and international business with the dedication of a scholar and the persistence of someone who had never forgotten her true calling. The dates on the certificates created a timeline that made Sterling's chest tight with something he couldn't name. Martha had been earning these qualifications while cleaning his offices. While he dismissed her, ignored her, treated her like furniture, she had been quietly building expertise that exceeded his own in areas he thought he understood. Martha kept learning and growing while being treated as invisible. If you've ever been underestimated because of where you work or where you come from, smash that like button. Type, "Never quit," if Martha's dedication inspires you. "Sir," David said, his voice thick with something that might have been awe, "every single certificate checks out." The dates span from 1989 to last month. She's been continuously enrolled in advanced education programs for over 30 years. Martha organized the documents with the same methodical precision she used for her cleaning supplies, each certificate perfectly aligned, each achievement presented with quiet pride. Sterling watched her hands, those weathered hands he had never really seen before, handle papers that represented a lifetime of intellectual pursuit. "This one," Martha said, placing a certificate written in elegant French script on top of the pile, "is from the Sorbonne. Advanced Cultural Sensitivity in Global Markets." "And this," she added a document bearing Chinese characters alongside English text, "is from Beijing University's distance learning program. Mandarin for business professionals." Sterling's designer suit felt like it was shrinking around him. Each document was another nail in the coffin of his assumptions, another piece of evidence that the woman he had humiliated possessed qualifications that made his own education look narrow and inadequate. The Japanese investors, who had been quietly observing this exchange, began speaking among themselves in rapid Japanese. Sterling couldn't understand a word, but their tone carried notes of impressed respect and what sounded suspiciously like criticism of his earlier behavior. "They're saying," Martha translated without being asked, her voice gentle but firm, "that you must value education and expertise very highly to have someone with my background on your team." They're impressed by your company's commitment to hiring the best talent regardless of conventional expectations." The irony hung in the air like smoke. Sterling's cruelty had been reframed by Martha's grace into something that made him look progressive rather than prejudiced. But instead of gratitude, he felt only the growing weight of his own ignorance. David finished his verification process and looked up at Sterling with an expression that contained equal parts shock and something that might have been disappointment in his boss. "Sir, these credentials are more extensive than most of our executive team's qualifications. Her language certifications alone represent more specialized training than our entire international division has combined." Martha's quiet dignity filled the room like morning light, illuminating corners that had been dark for too long. But Sterling sensed that this revelation of her academic credentials was just the beginning. There was something deeper in her eyes, something that suggested the real demonstration of her knowledge was yet to come, and that something would prove far more devastating than any diploma ever could. Each language Martha spoke would reveal another million-dollar mistake Sterling never knew he made. Martha closed her portfolio with the same quiet precision she had used to open it, but her work was far from finished. She looked directly at Sterling, and for the first time in 11 years, he saw her not as invisible help, but as the architect of his impending destruction. "Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice carrying the weight of accumulated knowledge, "would you like to know why your international expansion has been struggling?" Sterling's mouth went dry. The question landed like a physical blow because it touched on his deepest professional insecurity. For 3 years, his attempts to grow Sterling Technologies beyond American borders had met with frustration, failed negotiations, and partnerships that crumbled at the final moment. He had blamed market conditions, cultural differences, bad timing, anything except his own limitations. "Let me demonstrate my Spanish first," Martha continued, "and explain why Metallurgica Hernandez in Mexico City withdrew from your $8 million manufacturing partnership last spring." Sterling's face went white. That deal had been his crown jewel, a manufacturing agreement that would have revolutionized his company's production capacity. The withdrawal had come without explanation, leaving him confused and angry. Martha began speaking in rapid, fluid Spanish, her pronunciation carrying the natural rhythm of a native speaker. But she wasn't just demonstrating language skills, she was providing translation for conversations Sterling never knew had taken place. "The Hernandez family was insulted when you addressed the father as, 'Hey, buddy,' during the video conference," Martha explained, switching back to English. "In their culture, respect for elders and formal address are fundamental. When you laughed at their traditional blessing before the meal and called it cute folklore, they decided you lacked the cultural sensitivity to be trusted with their family business." Sterling's hands began to shake. He remembered that conference call, remembered thinking the Hernandez patriarch was being overly formal and traditional. He had been trying to be friendly, to break down barriers with casual American informality. $8 million, Martha said quietly, lost because nobody explained that respect looks different in different cultures. But she wasn't finished. Martha's voice shifted again, this time flowing with the musical cadence of Portuguese. Sterling watched in growing horror as she translated conversations from his failed Brazilian partnership. "Construtora Santos pulled out of the $6 million deal because you kept interrupting their presentation and checking your phone during their cultural ceremony. In Brazil, personal relationships come before business contracts. They interpreted your behavior as disrespect for their people and their traditions." Sterling remembered that meeting. He had been impatient with what seemed like unnecessary rituals, eager to get to the numbers and signatures. The Brazilians had seemed oversensitive, too focused on relationship building when they should have been talking profit margins. Martha continued her devastating demonstration, switching to French with the elegance of someone who had studied in Paris. Du Bois Industries canceled the $7 million contract because you used an online translator for your email correspondence. The translation software turned your professional proposal into accidentally offensive gibberish. You unknowingly suggested that French business practices were antiquated and that American methods were superior. Each revelation hit Sterling like a physical blow. These weren't minor communication errors. They were expensive disasters that had cost his company millions while he remained completely unaware of his mistakes. Martha's German was crisp and precise as she explained the collapse of the Frankfurt negotiation. $9 million lost because you didn't understand that Germans conduct business with detailed preparation and formal protocol. When you showed up unprepared and tried to wing it with charm and enthusiasm, they concluded you were unprofessional and unreliable. Sterling's legs felt weak. He sank into his leather chair as Martha methodically destroyed his understanding of his own business competence. Each language demonstration revealed another costly failure, another relationship damaged by his cultural blindness. Her Italian flowed like silk as she described the Milan supplier situation. $5 million in damaged relationships because you didn't realize that business meals are sacred in Italy. When you tried to discuss contracts during the family dinner they invited you to, you violated their separation of business and personal hospitality. They felt you had insulted their generosity. The Japanese investors on the screen were leaning forward, their expressions shifting from professional politeness to genuine concern as they witnessed this systematic destruction of Sterling's international reputation. Martha's Mandarin demonstration revealed the most expensive mistake of all. $12 million stalled in Shanghai because you gave business cards with one hand and put your feet up during meetings. In Chinese culture, these gestures showed profound disrespect. They're still willing to work with Sterling Technologies, but only if you're removed from the negotiation process. Sterling's designer shirt was soaked with sweat. Each revelation was worse than the last, and the mathematical weight of his ignorance was crushing. $38 million and counting, all lost to mistakes he didn't even know he had made. Martha's Arabic carried the Desert Winds Authority as she explained the UAE disaster. $8 million withdrawn because you scheduled meetings during Ramadan and offered alcohol at a business dinner. The Al-Rashid family concluded that you had no respect for Islamic customs and couldn't be trusted to honor their values in a partnership. The final blow came in fluent Russian. Martha's pronunciation was flawless, her cultural understanding devastating. $15 million frozen in Moscow because you tried to rush negotiations and demanded quick decisions. Russians build business relationships slowly, over time. Your impatience was interpreted as American arrogance and cultural superiority. Sterling sat in stunned silence as Martha finished her demonstration. $50 million. $50 million in lost revenue, damaged relationships, and failed partnerships, all because he had been too arrogant to recognize his own limitations or too proud to seek help from someone who possessed the knowledge he lacked. Martha just exposed $50 million in losses that could have been prevented with respect and communication. If you've ever seen someone's potential wasted because of prejudice, hit subscribe. Type "wasted talent" if this makes you angry. The Japanese investors on the screen were having a quiet conversation among themselves, their voices carrying tones of amazement and what Sterling was beginning to recognize as professional respect. Not for him, but for Martha. "Sterling-san," Yamamoto-san said finally, "we think it would be beneficial if Rodriguez-san participated directly in our negotiations. Her cultural expertise could prevent the kind of misunderstandings that apparently have cost your company significant opportunities." Sterling looked up at Martha, this woman he had dismissed and humiliated, and saw his entire business future in her hands. She possessed not just language skills, but the cultural intelligence that could unlock markets he had accidentally closed through ignorance. The power in the room had shifted completely. Martha stood confident and composed while Sterling sat broken in his chair, finally understanding that the invisible woman had been watching, learning, and quietly accumulating the expertise that could save or destroy his international ambitions. The question now was whether he was capable of the humility required to ask for her help, or if his pride would cost him even more than his ignorance already had. What Sterling was about to learn would prove he hadn't just employed a cleaning lady, he had overlooked a treasure hiding in plain sight. Martha looked around the conference room that had been her second home for over a decade, her eyes lingering on corners she had cleaned thousands of times, surfaces she had polished until they gleamed, windows she had made crystal clear so Sterling could see his Manhattan kingdom spread below. When she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of years held in silence. "Mr. Sterling, I need to tell you something that might help you understand why your international failures feel so personal to me." She reached into her portfolio one final time, but this time she withdrew something different. Not certificates or diplomas, but photographs. Faded color pictures that had been carefully preserved despite their age, showing a younger Martha in a very different world. "This was my office at Universidad Nacional in Bogotá," she said, placing the first photograph on Sterling's desk. It showed a bright, book-lined room where a woman in her early 30s sat behind a mahogany desk not unlike his own, surrounded by students who hung on her every word. "I was Professor Rodriguez. I taught international relations and cross-cultural business communication." Sterling stared at the photograph, his mind struggling to reconcile the confident academic in the picture with the woman he had dismissed as invisible help. This wasn't just someone who had studied languages, this was someone who had taught them, who had shaped young minds, who had been respected and valued for her intelligence. "I had everything," Martha continued, her voice growing softer but somehow more powerful. "Tenure-track position, published research, students who looked up to me. I was working on a book about cultural bridges in international commerce. My future was bright and secure." She placed another photograph on the desk. This one showed Martha with colleagues at what looked like an academic conference, everyone smiling and engaged in the kind of intellectual discussion that Sterling had only pretended to understand. But in 1994, the violence in Colombia reached the universities. Intellectuals, professors, anyone who encouraged students to think critically about society and government, we became targets. 3 of my colleagues received death threats. One of them, my closest friend, didn't heed the warnings. Martha's voice caught slightly, and for the first time since she had begun her demonstration, Sterling saw vulnerability in her composure. The pain in her eyes was real, raw, and decades old. Maria Elena was killed leaving her evening seminar. Shot twice in the university parking lot for teaching students to question authority, to think beyond traditional boundaries. That night, I knew I had to choose between my career and my family's safety. The photographs seemed to glow on Sterling's desk like windows into a lost world. Sterling found himself leaning forward, drawn into a story that was rewriting everything he thought he knew about the woman who had quietly served his company for over a decade. "I had a daughter," Martha said, producing a third photograph that showed her holding a little girl with bright eyes and a gap-toothed smile. "Carmen was 7 years old and the light of my life. The threats were escalating. I couldn't risk her future for my pride." Sterling felt something twist in his chest. He had a daughter too, knew the fierce protectiveness that came with parenthood. For the first time, he began to understand that Martha's choices had been driven by the same love that motivated his own decisions. "So we left everything. My career, my research, my life's work, all of it abandoned for a chance at safety in America. But when we arrived in New York, my Colombian degrees meant nothing. My accent made people assume I was uneducated. My experience was dismissed as irrelevant to American business. Martha organized the photographs with the same careful precision she brought to everything else, creating a timeline of loss and adaptation that made Sterling's throat tight. I took the cleaning job at Sterling Technologies because it offered something precious: invisibility. In my country, visibility had become dangerous. Here it was different, but being unseen still felt safer. And I discovered something unexpected. Her eyes met his directly, and Sterling saw intelligence that had never dimmed despite years of being overlooked. From my invisible position, I could study American corporate culture in its natural habitat. I could observe negotiations, listen to strategy sessions, watch how business really worked at the highest levels. For 11 years, I have been conducting the most extensive field research of my academic career. The weight of this revelation hit Sterling like a physical blow. Martha hadn't just been cleaning his offices. She had been studying his company with the trained eye of a scholar, analyzing his methods, understanding his failures, and quietly accumulating expertise that exceeded his own. I maintained my academic connections, she continued, producing correspondence from universities worldwide. Published papers under my maiden name about cross-cultural business communication. Consulted with international firms through email and video calls from my small apartment. I never stopped being Professor Rodriguez. I just became invisible. Martha sacrificed her career to protect her family and spent 11 years invisible in plain sight. If her story breaks your heart and fills you with respect, subscribe now. Type hero if Martha represents strength to you. Sterling's hands trembled as he looked at the photographs spread across his desk. Here was evidence of a life interrupted, a career sacrificed, a brilliant mind forced into hiding by circumstances beyond anyone's control. And instead of recognizing her worth, instead of seeing her potential, he had treated her like furniture for over a decade. Every day for 11 years, Martha said, her voice steady despite the emotion in her eyes. I listened to you make the same mistakes I could have helped you avoid. I watched you struggle with cultural barriers that I had spent my career learning to navigate. I saw opportunities slip away because nobody in your organization understood what I understood instinctively. The Japanese investors had gone completely silent, their faces showing a mixture of respect for Martha and what looked distinctly like disappointment in Sterling. They were witnessing not just a revelation of hidden talent, but a condemnation of a system that allowed such talent to go unrecognized. I stayed silent, Martha continued, because invisibility had kept my family safe. But watching you humiliate me in front of international colleagues crossed a line. It reminded me too much of the dismissal and disrespect that drove me from my homeland. Sterling looked at this woman, really looked at her, and saw not just wasted potential but active cruelty. For 11 years, he had possessed the solution to his international business problems, and his own blindness had prevented him from seeing it. Martha's story was more than personal tragedy. It was a mirror reflecting his own failures as a leader, as a human being, and as someone who claimed to value intelligence and expertise but had proven incapable of recognizing either when they didn't come wrapped in expensive packaging. The question now was whether he possessed the wisdom to learn from his mistakes, or whether his pride would compound the tragedy Martha had already endured. The choice Martha made next would determine not just Sterling's fate, but reveal the true measure of her character. The silence in the conference room stretched like a held breath. Sterling sat among the scattered photographs of Martha's former life, his expensive suit wrinkled from stress, his confidence shattered like glass on his marble floors. The Japanese investors on the screen exchanged meaningful glances, their conversation conducted in rapid whispers that Sterling couldn't understand, but Martha clearly could. Finally, Yamamoto-san spoke directly to the screen, his voice carrying the formal authority of someone making a significant business decision. Sterling-san, we have discussed this situation among ourselves. After witnessing Rodriguez-san's expertise and cultural understanding, We believe she is exactly the kind of professional we need for this partnership." Sterling felt his heart stop. This was the moment he had been dreading and expecting since Martha's first word of Japanese had left her lips. The inevitable conclusion to his years of arrogance and blindness. "We would prefer to work directly with Rodriguez-san on this project," Yamamoto-san continued, his words precise and final. "Her qualifications, cultural sensitivity, and language skills align perfectly with our requirements for international collaboration." The $80 million deal, Sterling's largest potential contract, the partnership that would secure his company's future and establish his legacy, was slipping through his fingers like sand. Not because of market conditions or competitive pricing, but because of his own cruelty toward the woman who could have been his greatest asset. Sterling's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. He looked at Martha, standing calm and composed beside his desk, and realized that his entire business future now rested in the hands of the person he had publicly humiliated just minutes earlier. Martha stood perfectly still, her weathered hands clasped in front of her, her expression unreadable. The power dynamic in the room had shifted so completely that Sterling felt dizzy from the reversal. This woman, who had been invisible to him for 11 years, now controlled whether his company would thrive or collapse. The Japanese investors waited patiently for her response, treating her with the respect and attention that Sterling had never shown. David, his assistant, watched the scene with wide eyes, witnessing the complete destruction and reconstruction of power in a single conference room. Martha had two clear choices stretching before her like divergent paths. She could let Sterling's business crumble as punishment for 11 years of dismissal, disrespect, and today's public humiliation. It would be justice in its purest form. A man who had refused to see her worth, losing everything because of his blindness. The poetic justice would satisfy anyone who had ever been overlooked, undervalued, or treated as invisible. Or she could demonstrate the grace that had sustained her through decades of sacrifice, showing mercy to someone who had shown her none. Sterling watched her face, searching for any sign of her decision. His hands trembled as he realized that all his wealth, all his connections, all his supposed business acumen meant nothing in this moment. He was completely dependent on the mercy of a woman he had treated as less than human. "Rodriguez-san," Yamamoto-san said gently, "we would be honored to have someone of your caliber represent our partnership interests. Would you be willing to take on this responsibility?" Martha looked at Sterling, really looked at him, and saw not the arrogant billionaire who had mocked her, but a broken man confronting the consequences of his own limitations. She saw fear in his eyes, yes, but also something that might have been the beginning of understanding. When she spoke, her voice carried the quiet strength that had sustained her through political violence, forced migration, career sacrifice, and 11 years of invisible service. "Yamamoto-san, I appreciate your confidence in my abilities. However, I believe in institutional loyalty and professional hierarchy. Mr. Sterling is the head of this company, and any partnership should acknowledge that structure." Sterling's relief was so profound he felt light-headed. She was saving him. After everything he had done, after years of treating her like furniture, after publicly humiliating her in front of international clients, Martha was choosing to protect his position rather than claim the power that was rightfully hers. But Martha wasn't finished. "However," she continued, her voice firming with professional authority, "if I am to contribute to this partnership's success, I will need certain conditions to be met. First, I must be recognized as senior consultant for international relations with appropriate compensation and respect. Second, all cultural sensitivity training for Sterling Technologies will go through my department. Third, Mr. Sterling and I will need to have regular strategic meetings to prevent the kind of misunderstandings that have cost this company $50 million in lost opportunities." Martha chose grace over revenge when she could have destroyed him. If you believe good people deserve good things, hit that subscribe button. Type Grace if Martha's choice inspires you to be better. Sterling nodded frantically, agreeing to conditions he would never have considered an hour earlier. The woman he had mocked was offering him salvation, but on terms that acknowledged her worth and ensured her voice would finally be heard. "And one final condition," Martha said, her eyes meeting Sterling's directly. "Every employee of Sterling Technologies, regardless of their position or background, will be treated with dignity and respect. No exceptions." The Japanese investors were smiling now, their expressions showing approval for both Martha's professional expertise and her ethical leadership. They had witnessed not just a business negotiation, but a masterclass in grace under pressure. Sterling extended his hand toward Martha, a gesture that would have been unthinkable an hour earlier. "Ms. Rodriguez, I would be honored to have you as senior consultant. And I owe you an apology that goes far deeper than business." Martha looked at his outstretched hand for a long moment. The weight of 11 years of invisibility, of dismissed intelligence, of wasted potential hung between them. Then she reached out and shook his hand with the firm grip of someone who had finally stepped out of the shadows and into the recognition she had always deserved. The partnership was saved, but more importantly, two people had found their way to mutual respect through the wreckage of prejudice and pride. Sterling's company would flourish under Martha's guidance, but the real transformation was just beginning. What Sterling said next would determine whether this story ended in justice or transformation. The Japanese investors had disconnected from their call with promises to send formal partnership documents within the week. David had excused himself to begin the legal paperwork that would formalize Martha's new position. The conference room, which an hour earlier had been the stage for public humiliation, now felt like a confessional, quiet, intimate, and heavy with the weight of truth. Sterling sat slumped in his leather chair, the photographs of Martha's former life still scattered across his desk like evidence in a trial where he had been found guilty of willful blindness. Martha remained standing, but her posture had softened from the confident authority she had displayed during the negotiation to something more human, more accessible. "Martha," Sterling said, and it was the first time in 11 years he had spoken her name with genuine respect. "I need to understand something. How many other people like you work in this building?" The question hung between them like a bridge he was finally ready to cross. Martha looked at him carefully, searching his face for signs of authentic curiosity rather than performative concern. "What do you mean by people like me, Mr. Sterling?" "People whose intelligence I've been too blind to see. People whose potential I've wasted because I made assumptions based on their uniforms or their accents or their job titles." His voice carried the weight of someone confronting an ugly truth about himself. "I've been blind, arrogant, and wrong. Not just about you, but probably about dozens of others." Martha pulled out the chair across from Sterling's desk, a chair she had dusted countless times but never been invited to sit in. The gesture felt revolutionary, this simple act of taking a seat at his table as an equal. "There's Maria in the cafeteria," Martha said quietly. "She has a law degree from El Salvador and speaks 4 languages. She applied for paralegal positions in your legal department 3 times and was told she was overqualified for entry-level work but underqualified for professional positions." Sterling's hands pressed flat against his desk as he absorbed this information. He had eaten lunch prepared by Maria hundreds of times without ever seeing her as anything more than kitchen staff. "There's Chen in maintenance," Martha continued, her voice patient but firm. "He has an engineering degree from Shanghai and worked for a tech company in China before his wife's job brought them here. He's been trying to transition back to engineering work, but nobody in your technical departments takes his applications seriously." Each revelation hit Sterling like a physical blow. These weren't abstract concepts about workplace diversity. These were specific people, real talents, wasted opportunities that happened under his own roof while he remained completely oblivious. "David knows," Martha said, referring to his young assistant. "He's mentioned several times that there are qualified people throughout the company who could contribute more if anyone bothered to look beyond their current roles." Sterling's face flushed with shame. Even his own assistant had seen what he had missed, had tried to bring these issues to his attention in ways he had been too self-absorbed to notice. "This isn't just about you, Martha," Sterling said, his voice thick with realization. "It's about who I've become. It's about the culture I've created where intelligence is only recognized when it comes wrapped in expensive degrees and designer clothes." Martha leaned forward slightly, her teacher's instincts recognizing a student ready to learn. "Your assumptions have created a system where people hide their abilities instead of sharing them," she explained. "Employees learn quickly that their worth is judged by their job title rather than their knowledge. So they stay quiet, stay invisible, because speaking up often leads to mockery rather than opportunity." Sterling thought about the countless meetings where he had dominated conversations, dismissed suggestions from lower-level employees, and surrounded himself with people who looked and sounded like him. He began to see the human cost of his arrogance, not just in failed business deals, but in crushed spirits and wasted lives. "How do I fix this?" he asked, and for the first time in their 11-year acquaintance, he was genuinely asking Martha for guidance rather than issuing commands. "Recognition starts with awareness," Martha said. "But awareness without action is just guilty knowledge. You need to create systems that identify and nurture talent regardless of where it currently exists in your organization." Sterling's finally seeing the truth about himself. If you've ever had to confront your own prejudices and grow, subscribe. Type growth if you believe people can change when they truly want to. "I want to conduct interviews with every employee in this building," Sterling said, the words tumbling out with the urgency of someone who had finally understood the magnitude of his failure. "Not performance reviews, but conversations about their backgrounds, their skills, their aspirations. I want to know who they really are." Martha's expression softened with something that might have been hope. After 11 years of watching Sterling make the same mistakes repeatedly, she was seeing the first genuine signs of growth. "That's a start," she said. "But you also need to examine your hiring practices, your promotion criteria, your entire approach to human resources. Ask yourself who gets heard in meetings, whose ideas get implemented, whose potential gets recognized." Sterling nodded, his mind already racing with the scope of change required. This wasn't just about fixing his relationship with Martha, it was about transforming his entire approach to leadership and human worth. "I've damaged more than business deals," he said quietly. "I've damaged people. Real people with dreams and talents and families who depend on them." "Yes," Martha agreed, "but recognition is the first step toward repair. The question is whether you have the courage to follow through when change becomes difficult, when it requires you to share power rather than just acknowledge mistakes." Sterling looked across his desk at this woman who had shown him grace when she could have chosen revenge, who was offering wisdom when she could have walked away. He saw not just his path to redemption, but his opportunity to become the leader he had always claimed to be. The real transformation was just beginning, and both of them knew that words would mean nothing without sustained action to back them up. 6 months after the conference room confrontation that changed everything, Martha Rodriguez stood at the head of Sterling Technologies' main boardroom, leading a negotiation with investors from 3 continents. The same mahogany table where she had once emptied waste baskets now served as her command center, covered with contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Her business card read, "Executive Vice President of Global Communications," in elegant script, but the title barely captured the scope of her influence. Martha had become the bridge between Sterling Technologies and the international markets that Sterling had fumbled for years, her cultural expertise opening doors that had remained closed to American arrogance. The financial results spoke louder than any corporate mission statement. International contracts had increased by 300%, transforming Sterling Technologies from a struggling domestic company into a global powerhouse. Martha's cultural sensitivity training had prevented costly mistakes, while her language skills had unlocked markets across 4 continents. Sterling himself had undergone the most dramatic transformation of all. The man who had once mocked a cleaning lady's intelligence now stood before industry conferences teaching unconscious bias training to other executives. His presentations carried the authority of someone who had learned from his own failures, and his company had become a case study in the business value of recognizing hidden talent. The cost of prejudice isn't just moral, Sterling told a packed auditorium at the International Business Leadership Summit, it's financial. When we dismiss people based on their job titles or their accents, we're not just being unfair, we're being stupid. My company lost $50 million to cultural ignorance before Martha Rodriguez saved us from our own blindness. The audience, hundreds of executives who had likely made similar assumptions about their own employees, listened with the uncomfortable attention of people recognizing themselves in Sterling's confession. Martha, sitting in the front row wearing the respect she had always deserved, watched her former tormentor accept responsibility for years of wasted potential. Their professional partnership had evolved into something neither had expected, genuine friendship built on mutual respect and shared purpose. But the transformation extended far beyond their relationship. Maria from the cafeteria now served as Sterling Technologies' paralegal coordinator, her law degree finally recognized and valued. Chen had transitioned from maintenance to the engineering department, where his innovations had improved manufacturing efficiency by 40%. David, Sterling's assistant, had been promoted to Director of Human Resources with a mandate to identify and nurture hidden talent throughout the organization. The company culture had shifted so dramatically that Sterling Technologies received recognition as Best Place to Work for Diversity from 3 different business organizations. Employees who had spent years hiding their qualifications now competed for advancement opportunities based on merit rather than appearances. Martha's corner office on the executive floor featured the same faded photographs from her Columbian University days, but now they served as inspiration rather than painful reminders of loss. Her daughter Carmen, now a successful attorney herself, visited regularly to see the mother who had sacrificed everything for her safety finally receiving the recognition she deserved. The ripple effects extended throughout the industry. Other companies began implementing Martha protocols, systematic reviews of employee backgrounds and qualifications to identify overlooked talent. Business schools started teaching case studies about Sterling Technologies' transformation, using Martha's story to illustrate the financial benefits of inclusive leadership. Sterling and Martha's partnership had become legendary in business circles, proving that recognizing worth wherever it exists creates success for everyone involved. Their quarterly meetings had evolved into strategic planning sessions where Martha's cultural insights shaped company direction, while Sterling's business connections opened new opportunities. Martha and Sterling's transformation proves that seeing people's true worth changes everything. If their story moved you to see others differently, subscribe and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Type transformation if you believe in the power of second chances. The most powerful changes, however, were the personal ones. Sterling had learned to see beyond surfaces, to ask questions rather than make assumptions, to recognize that intelligence came in many forms. Martha had stepped out of the shadows she had hidden in for over a decade, claiming the recognition that had always been her due. Their handshake at company board meetings represented more than business partnership. It symbolized the possibility of growth, redemption, and mutual respect between people who had started as strangers separated by prejudice and pride. Martha now mentored other employees who felt invisible, sharing her story to inspire those who had given up hope of being seen for their true worth. She conducted workshops on overcoming career obstacles and cultural barriers, transforming her painful experience into wisdom that helped others navigate similar challenges. Sterling's personal growth had rippled into his family life as well. He began really seeing his own daughter, asking about her dreams and aspirations rather than assuming he knew what was best for her. He started noticing service workers, engaging in conversations that revealed the full human beings behind their uniforms and job titles. The company's success metrics told only part of the story. More important were the lives changed, the potential unlocked, the dignity restored to people who had been dismissed and overlooked. Sterling Technologies had become proof that recognizing human worth wasn't just the right thing to do. It was the smart thing to do. Martha's story proves that extraordinary people exist everywhere, in every uniform, behind every counter, in every quiet corner. They're waiting not for handouts, but for someone to see their worth. The question isn't whether talent exists around you, it's whether you have the wisdom to recognize it and the courage to act on that recognition. If Martha's journey from invisible to indispensable moved your heart, I have an entire collection of SoulThread stories about people who refused to stay hidden. These stories will inspire you, challenge you, and remind you that heroes exist everywhere. Comment, collection, if you want access to all the stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things, because every person has a story worth telling, and every story has the power to change how we see the world.